Hi, my name is Tony.
And I'm Chris.
And we love pop culture. We often find ourselves discussing film, music, literature, and more, going down the rabbit hole of how everything is connected. We want to share those moments in pop culture that are seemingly unrelated, but connected by just a few links. Welcome to the Pop Culture Connection. All right, welcome back to another episode of the Pop Culture Connection. This is Tony.
And I'm Chris.
We're going to explore two things that you wouldn't think are connected in any way, but end up having some links in between them. This week, we're going to be talking about Meatloaf and The Godfather. Meatloaf, the singer, not the food product.
Both are good.
Both are good.
I'll take either.
If you eat meatloaf while listening to Meatloaf, I know he's not for everyone. I've always been a big fan.
Well, I guess that's with anything. But I don't see how you couldn't be a fan of the dish or the musician.
That's true. So before we get into that, though, we'll kind of talk about stuff that's going on, a few things that are intriguing this week in pop culture. I don't know what it says about our country and our government when more people are trusting Dog the Bounty Hunter to find someone over the FBI.
Well, he's a bounty hunter.
It is his job. He doesn't have the same rules to play by.
That's right. He doesn't play by any rules.
Not even his own.
Not even his own rules. He's the dog.
I just think it's interesting that that's become a thing now. And according to him, he's very close to getting Brian Laundrie, which I hope he's found alive.
No, we'll see. I mean, at this point, he's most likely gator feed, but that might be the best outcome.
Possibly. I do know that he also had some experience in camping and roughing it and being out in the wilderness, so he could have found a way to survive, and rumor has it he's up near the Appalachian Trail right now, which he could have found a fate worse than gators with.
That's true. I've seen Deliverance.
There are people who will make you wish they were gators in all parts of the country, but that's a good one not to be from out of town.
Yes, but Dog's gonna find him, and because he's that good, and it's in no way a publicity stunt to stay relevant.
Not at all. Why would you even do that?
Right.
And then Brian Laundrie is one thing, and speaking of terrible people, I also saw that Alex Jones found guilty of defamation, calling Sandy Hook a hoax after failing to provide any information of substance to support his claim.
Well, I mean, why do you have to back your claims up?
You shouldn't have to.
It's way easier to say them and just...
to shout them, if you're him.
Just yell them with conviction, and that's really all you can do.
Take some silver pills and vitamin K and scream about gay frogs and hoaxes, and that's what America's all about.
Right. True or not, it's at the end of the day, it's all about, did we learn something? No.
We don't have to learn anything. Yeah, I thought that was pretty interesting. The more he gets pushed against, the more he claims he's just a performance artist and doesn't expect anyone to really listen to him until his show, when he says everyone has to listen to me.
Now, this is interesting because is this something that's going to be... I mean, does he have to now admit that this happened? I mean, the type of person he is, I doubt that's going to happen, but it will be something to watch to see if he has to come clean, so to speak.
Yeah, I'm not sure if he's going to end up, but I can't see him owning up to really anything. It's just not him. But it's not all crazy people and murderers and scumbags on the radio.
Not all.
Not all. I did see a few trailers come out for some TV shows, including the new season of Stranger Things.
Yeah.
Which looked interesting.
It's coming up.
Bringing it back in time a little bit.
Even stranger.
More things that are stranger than the other things. I think it's called.
Of course, with the delay in production, I mean, these kids are going to be graduated from college by the time.
Right. It's going to be like later seasons of 90210 when they're like 50.
Yeah.
I just think it's not really about kids anymore.
Well, they were close to 50 when they started that show.
Right.
So, yeah, I can't wait for that.
It does look really good. I'm interested to see where they go. And then I saw the trailer for the live action Neil Gaiman Sandman. That's going to be on Netflix. Which
that should be interesting.
Looks very, very cool. Looks like they're starting right at the beginning. The very first issues and graphic novel of Sandman, based on what I just saw from that little teaser. The actor who's playing Morpheus or Sandman looks exactly like how you expect. So that's one thing that I didn't ever think would be able to be brought to any kind of screen, but with Neil Gaiman being involved in it directly, then I have faith that it'll be pretty good.
It'll be something to check out.
And then finally, other things, more Netflix stuff. Promise that we're not endorsed by Netflix in any way. Just Netflix, if you hear this, we'll talk.
They've got the money.
Maybe we could be in connection with each other. But they acquired the rights to a collection from Roald Dahl.
Yes.
We're going to be... So we'll cover him in a future episode. He has got some interesting connections in his life and an interesting life in general. But multiple live action and animated shows from Roald Dahl, including a new adaptation of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. And I believe George's Marvelous Medicine, Matilda, the BFG. He was one of my favorite children's authors.
He kind of hit on everything.
Definitely an influence, you could tell, on J.K. Rowling as well. Some of the way she wrote. Harry Potter was very much almost a Roald Dahl story of the kid with shitty adults learning that he has got something magical and going into this world. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that. It could be very cool. But yeah, we'll see. What do you got, Chris? Anything going on in the world of pop culture that you
I
noticed?
rely on you to be my eyes and ears as I dwell in the subterranean,
Homesick.
literally, we're in the basement here. And I only come out to check the mail and re-up my supplies.
And that's all right. I'm happy to do it. I like to check out what's going on. New animated Super Mario Brothers movie.
Really?
Will it be as good as Bob Hoskins and John Leguizamo?
It's going to be hard to do.
How can you top that?
The ghost of Dennis Hopper, maybe.
Remember when Dennis Hopper made that movie?
I don't think Dennis Hopper.
I don't think he knows. So yeah, we'll see how that goes. Time will tell. Who knows? It could end up being a hit. I've been wrong many times before.
Yeah, they should have learned their lesson, but I guess with the success of the Sonic the Hedgehog movie, why not take a shot?
So, moving on into the meat, no pun intended, of today's episode. Michael, or depending, it's born Marvin Lee Aday, and then later changed the name to Michael Lee Aday, is probably better known by his stage name Meatloaf. He got that from his high school football coach poking fun at his weight. He is a bigger guy.
Some people even just shortened it to Meat.
He does go by Meat sometimes. Probably one of the more unique rock and roll pop artists of our time. Definitely plays a character. Very dramatic, operatic performances. Have you ever seen him live?
No.
I had gone when Bad Out of Hell 2, that album came out.
Early 90s.
Early 90s and so on. And it was mind-blowing performance. Great show. And then saw him a few years back. He's getting older. He had voice surgery. It was still a good show, but he's not a young guy anymore and he can't do what he once did.
Yeah.
So what is what is I know we've talked about it before, but your connection with the Loaf?
Well, it was one of the first compact discs that my parents bought. We had a CD player.
Bat Out of Hell.
Bat Out of Hell. And my mom had 3 CDs. It was Culture Club, Melissa Etheridge, and Bat Out of Hell by Neil Gaiman.
The Holy Trinity.
The Holy
of
Trinity
mom music.
Of mom music. And so we got a whole new stereo system, the whole bit, speakers, and with the CD player built in. And we would rock that mother quite a bit, especially during times of when you need an energy boost.
Yeah, and it's funny that you say that because I remember our family getting the first CD player sometime in the mid to late 80s, and that was one of the first CDs that my mother picked up. Only had a few. I believe Dire Straits was on that list, but Meatloaf, Bat Out of Hell was a huge album, I think, in our household.
Yeah, it was on heavy rotation, probably because we only had a few albums, but at the same time became very familiar with it. That opening piano part just gets me going every time.
Oh yeah, that'll do it. It's definitely I have a time of year, actually this time of year, the fall. We're just in October now, and there's something about the cool, crisp days and evenings that gets me in the mood to rock out to that album.
As you pining for some Meatloaf?
And it's definitely one that I still have on rotation. So I was kind of looking it up. I do know kind of a bit the history of the album. Just kind of reading through. So a couple interesting things. Because of the content, because it's a very theatrical, it's very different than most pop and rock at the time, had some difficulty getting the album produced at first. Luckily, Todd Rundgren, who had met up with Meatloaf and Jim Steinman, he agreed to not only produce it, but agreed to also play guitar with other members of his band on the album.
They killed it.
And that's where you get that awesome motorcycle sounding guitar from Todd Rundgren in there, but he was a big part of it. And another part, it wasn't really doing anything until Cleveland station WMMS that gave it radio time, which is then when it really kicked off.
Broke a lot of music in those days. Yes.
Yeah. MMS was definitely one of those stations that gave a lot of artists at that time some playtime, and Rush, Meatloaf, Springsteen, the program directors at WMMS and here in Cleveland really knew what was on the edge here and wanted to give it some air, and ended up becoming huge artists and huge hits because of that.
Yeah, it's one of those records that producers in the 70s were kind of moving towards this. We know what the kids want to hear, and so nobody wanted to produce it. And once finally somebody took a chance and it got out there and started getting picked up, it became one of the more popular albums of that decade. So shows what the people in charge, these gatekeepers, really know.
Right. And that's, I think we talk about radio on a lot of our episodes here. We've mentioned college radio before. But it was a very different time then where that could make or break up an artist. Yeah. And very fortunate that we had those stations who took a chance and really kind of found things that were outside of the norm and gave it a shot, because it ended up being, again, like you said, a huge album. As of 2009, Bat Out of Hell still sells an estimated 200,000 copies annually. Jeez, and had stayed on the charts for over 9 years. It is one of the best-selling albums of all time. It's also one of my Desert Island discs.
Well, it it does take you on a roller coaster ride of emotion.
There is a lot going on in it. Not truly a concept album. In a way, there's some connection between and theme across all the songs, but not, I wouldn't say truly a concept album.
Yeah, I guess the concept of the concept album really hadn't. When did that really take off? Sometime around Pink Floyd?
I think that as far as truly, because even Sgt. Pepper,
Yeah.
I mean, even going back to Zappa Freak Out,
Sure.
it's a very loose idea of what a concept is.
Right.
The concept is a freak out, which is in and on of itself is erratic,
Undefined.
and undefined. You know, Sgt. Pepper was the first kind of like, hey, maybe this can be a thing. But I don't think it was until Pink Floyd that truly, maybe The Who as well, who took it and made it into a full story.
Yeah. It feels like a concept album, though. Even though, like you said, there are some songs that were recorded later or some songs that they had for quite a while. But just based on the production and the overall feel of the album, it all feels cohesive.
Right. And then the other thing I saw, which is just mind-blowing, so this is as of December of last year, 2020, it had spent a total of 522 weeks in the top 200 UK chart, which makes it the longest stay in any music chart in the world, although the published chart contains just 100 positions. But regardless, that's unheard of.
Yeah,
And
what is it about the English? They just, they kind of adopt these American groups that we just, like, yeah, we're done with that. And the English kind of give them a life after their American death.
no, that's it. And I don't know if that has anything to do with his acting career. He's been in quite a few movies. You might know him from Rocky Horror Picture Show before this album came out. He was in Meatloaf, the movie starring Meatloaf. He was in Fight Club.
Yes.
His name is Robert Paulson.
Iconic scene.
His name is Robert Paulson. His name is Robert Paulson.
Come on, guys,
His
please,
name
stop it.
is Robert Paulson. His name is Robert Paulson. His name is Robert Paulson.
This is over with.
His name is Robert Paulson. His name is Robert Paulson. His name is Robert Paulson.
And so I don't know if that has anything to do with it, but I do, completely agree that there is these, what we might call a one-off or a few hit wonder that ends up having this completely different life in the UK.
I wonder if that goes both ways. I mean, I know a lot of English bands are very popular here, obviously, going all the way back to prior to the British invasion, but I wonder if there's a lot of bands in England who nobody really listens to that a lot of Yanks are still keen on.
I hear they're not big fans of Beatles over there.
That's what I heard too.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. If you're from the UK and you happen to listen to this and you know, let us know. Or even if you don't know, let us know what you don't know. So it is, again, it's an iconic album of the time. It's so different than most other things you get. It contains teenage death / crash songs. It has somber ballads, a lot of angst, but there's one that kind of stands out. Probably the most known song from the album, still played at weddings and parties at all time, is Paradise by the Dashboard Light.
Oh, I thought you were going to say 2 out of 3.
That's another one that's been huge.
Not really big at weddings.
I wouldn't hope so. Even this one, when you listen to the lyrics, I remember hanging out. We were at a bar one night. Someone put this Paradise by the Dashboard Light on the jukebox, and had a friend who was kind of like, "Oh, this song, it's just such a long song." And I was like, "Have you listened to the lyrics?" And then I kind of like pointed out what they were saying at the end. He's like, "Holy shit!" I'm like, yeah, it's funny. It's not something you would expect to be in a love song.
Yeah, leave it to an American audience to not really pay attention to what is being said in the song.
Right. It's 8 minutes long, over 8 minutes long. For a single, especially at that time, was
Sure.
unheard of. It still is. I know a lot of people give Meatloaf song's crap, Jim Steinman song's crap for being long, but it definitely tells a story within itself, too. So I think most people know Paradise by the Dashboard Light pretty well. Again, it's probably between that and 2 out of 3 Ain't Bad. One of the more popular songs from that album.
What's your favorite on the album?
That's a hard question.
Well, I haven't heard that one.
It's on the bonus disc. That's a hard question. It starts out like a motorcycle. No. I love Bat Out of Hell. Again, like you said, that opening is just amazing. And the whole way through it, the story that it tells. But I'm also a huge fan of For Crying Out Loud. It's just a solid, a little bit, still longer song, but just a beautiful, beautiful song. Lyrically, there's nothing like it.
Mine's All Revved Up.
That's interesting. That's never been one of my favorites. The whole album is something I would take if I had only 5 to choose from. Is one I would take, but it kind of depends on what mood I'm in, what I'm into. Paradise, I would skip for a while just because you heard it so much. Popular. I wouldn't say it doesn't fit, because it does. It's a very teenage relationship, passionate, early young love. There's nothing in the world but you all around. But yeah, I would still skip it because it was to me, played on the radio all the time when there's other stuff on the album to play.
Yes. Have you gotten your wife to warm up to it yet?
I have not. I don't think that's going to happen. There's certain things. Meatloaf, Lost, Clockwork Orange, which I've just accepted defeat. That's not going to be a thing we ever experience together. But that's all right.
Not only does she not like Meatloaf, but she seems openly hostile.
She's angry that Meatloaf exists. Yes. Which is funny to me.
Well, you remember the email I sent you about the mental states of people who don't like Meatloaf. That's according to Jim Steinman himself, so take it with a grain of salt.
Right.
But, according to him, they did, in the UK, psychological studies that show that if you don't like Meatloaf, you're probably an antisocial person with mental problems. That's not to say anything about Tony's lovely wife.
No, I know that she is a beautiful, wonderful person. I love her dearly. That is just one thing that we do not have in common is our feelings about the loaf. I don't think it's going to end up in divorce. It's just something we don't share.
That would be, I guess you'd have to write into him to let him know if you'd enjoy that.
It'd be the first time in history.
Maybe
not. Yeah,
Maybe not.
That's a good
probably
point.
Happened a lot.
That's a good point. Yeah, but I was thinking about it. Now, the humor in Paradise, I don't know if there's any other songs on the album that has that kind of biting satire humor to it.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit different. But there's also something that's not in any other song, break in the vocals, where a baseball announcer is excitedly describing a player who's making his way around the bases in a not-so-subtle insinuation of 2 teenagers, quote-unquote, rounding the bases with each other.
Mm-hmm. It's one of the first wide uses of a sample, and it works perfectly within the context of the breakdown and then the build-up. Iconic.
Yeah, you remember being a teenager and getting to second base or third base, and that was the language at the time.
I wasn't very good at baseball or with the ladies.
No, I just remember hearing about it.
Rarely would I even get to bat. So when I did, I was like, just enjoy this.
You played a lot of t-ball.
Right.
Ooh. But it is a thing that people said. I don't know if people still say it. If that's still a thing that people say. Yeah. Let us know if you're younger than us.
What's the sport now that describes sexual euphemisms?
But Yeah, there was definitely, and I know that, it was recorded, but they had someone well known for being a sports announcer and baseball announcer, very well known. Phil Rizzuto spent his entire career with the Yankees. He was a former shortstop, nicknamed the Scooter. And after playing for the Yankees, he went on to become their announcer. Another 40 years as announcer for the team. Mm-hmm. And one of the most well-known voices in baseball outside of Vin Scully or Harry Carey.
Yeah. And he played for the Yankees.
Yes.
Wow. It doesn't seem like after the Second World War during the 50s that at some point everybody played for the Yankees. This was like a rite of passage.
You had to. That's how you got your American citizenship. You played for at least a season. Such a huge part of that team, part of that city. If I know that someone exists in sports, they're pretty well known because I don't know anything at all about most sports. But I know who Phil Rizzuto is.
Yeah, you know of Babe Ruth and Tom Brady.
Right. And I know Shoeless Joe Jackson because I've seen Field of Dreams.
Mm-hmm. And then LeBron came over your house one time.
Oh, yeah. Well, I know LeBron.
We live here.
Yeah, we live here. So LeBron visits us he makes an annual stop at everyone's house.
But you're not familiar with his work.
Baseball? Yeah, if I know who someone is in the world of sports, they're pretty well known. And I know that, for 40 years, Phil Rizzuto was such a big part of the commentary portion of baseball. And even before that, was a very good player, well known. And again, when it comes to sports announcers, I think there's only really a handful that you can name as being, at least nationwide, who that is. And that voice, very distinctive voice he had, known for saying, unbelievable. And did you see that? And also you can find them online. I'll try to find a clip to play here. There were also really funny moments where he had almost like a stream of consciousness conversation with himself about the play.
Oh, cow. A drive to deep left center, and that ball is out of here. No, it's not. Yes, it is. No? What happened? He caught it? You got to be kidding. I know I got to get these glasses changed. Seaver saw it, and I didn't believe him. Oh, I got to see that again before I declare it. Now look at Stanley looking back. I'm doing the same thing. Watch this. Here he goes. He, son of a gun, hit the fence and held on. At the end of 7, it's the Yankees 4 and the Orioles 2.
So you can find those on YouTube or SoundCloud, and they're absolutely hilarious. Just to see him kind of forget that he's commentating a baseball game. It's like watching it with your grandfather. Yeah. Which is pretty funny.
Well, and he was a radio guy, so let's have that connection from Meatloaf and kind of breaking on the radio. Not much. Well, stuff still plays on the radio, but it's not as relevant or big as it once was. But sports on the radio, especially up until the 50s when people could afford a TV, so that's all you heard.
Right. No, that's a good point.
So a city's sports announcer would be a very well-known personality. They still are, but even more so in those days. I mean, who here in Cleveland, I don't really care for watching the Indians, soon to be Guardians, but I like to listen to Todd Hamilton call the games on the radio.
And even, I still, know Herb Score from years ago was another one that was pretty well known. I know my whole family's the same way. When they were watching a game, they would turn the volume on the TV off and listen to the radio. Yeah. It feels more like being at the ballpark than watching a TV. Not to say television announcers. I have no frame of reference. Don't listen to me. I'm not saying anything about the announcers on television. Bob Costas, don't come at me like before.
Right, again.
Yeah, but I think that's a good point. I wonder if it is because it's a staple of the sport, or if there's something to it about.
It's a constant in this crazy chaotic world. So people can hold to that, and it's provides a sense of security, I think.
Right. You know, he's referenced, Phil Rizzuto's referenced some things. There's a scene in Billy Madison specifically mentioning the spelling of Phil Rizzuto.
Rizzuto.
Z.
Rudolph?
Those are Z's.
They look like ours to me.
That's not fair. Rizzuto is not a word. He's a baseball player. You're cheating.
Would you like to try the word buzz?
But I think the strangest reference that I can think of to him is a episode of Seinfeld where part of the plot revolves around a keychain of his head.
Yes. I'd love to have a keychain like that.
So Seinfeld is something that you and I have talked about. One of our favorite shows.
Certainly.
As far as shows at that time, ran 9 seasons, I think.
Yep.
And I can't think of anything else like it that had that feel to it between the writing from Jerry Seinfeld and Larry David. We've talked about this before. Larry David just has that sense of, what can I do? What do I do that pisses people off? And do people notice it? What pisses me off? And do people notice when I do it as much as I notice it?
Right. Yeah. There's social awkwardness. And then there's Larry David.
And he's got it down too. So when you look at his other show, Curb Your Enthusiasm, I mean, he just takes everything they did on Seinfeld and takes it even further, which is saying something. But I know there's people who just don't like that uncomfortable, like, cringe comedy. Right. But that's where it is when you look at a character like George Costanza, who dropped his Phil Rizzuto keychain in a pothole that had been filled in and has to jackhammer it out.
Hijinks ensue.
They do.
If you haven't seen it.
Pretty well-known episode, I think. I think everyone has a favorite. There's the more popular episodes like the Soup Nazi and the Contest. For me, Seinfeld, it'll always be the Kenny Rogers Roasters is my favorite episode, just because of how bizarre it is, and Jerry and Kramer switching apartments and kind of taking on each other's personalities. Mr. Marbles was a great little revelation of what it's life like in Kramer's apartment.
Which is not shown very often.
Yeah, you only kind of got glimpses of little things. There was like weird stuff going on at all times, but...
And it was almost always different.
Right.
Every time it was shown.
He was constantly changing it or adding something. Levels. But yeah, I think Kenny Rogers, we've probably discussed this together, but what would you say is your favorite?
Ooh, much like my meatloaf question to you,
it is tough.
That's hard to say. I'm hard pressed. Let me think about it.
All right. We'll come back to that at some point. There's a lot of classics. I think Screen Rant and Entertainment Weekly and all those other entertainment networks and channels have done some kind of breakdown of the best episodes, top 100, top 20. The Contest is always at the top.
Yeah, it's not my favorite episode.
It's a good episode. It's great. It's amazing that they got away with that on network television at that time. The Chinese Restaurant.
Not my favorite episode.
It's, a good bottle episode. Not a lot of shows had the balls to spend a half hour with an episode about waiting for a table at a Chinese restaurant.
Definitely a gamble.
Right. Which a lot of those were. The network. Luckily, someone believed in the show and said this will work, because on paper, probably looked like, who would watch this?
Yeah. And nobody really did at first.
Yeah. I know the first season wasn't a full run. I know Larry David, when they told him they wanted to pick up for more episodes, was upset about it because it meant pressure to write more.
He's going to have to work.
Right. Not a fan of having to do that, but it is. I mean, it maintains it remains a classic sitcom and one of the best sitcoms of all time on television.
Yeah, it's entrenched in culture now, and I think even 40, 50 years from now, much like you still see The Honeymooners, it'll still be airing somewhere.
Though I've heard that it doesn't do very well with the younger generations now. There are things that
what does?
They find offensive, or I don't know if it's taking offense or the frame of reference isn't there of not knowing that world and that life, and it's very different than it was in the 90s.
Oh, yes.
A lot of Seinfeld episodes could have been resolved with a cell phone call.
They could have.
But we didn't have those.
Situational humor that really nobody found themselves in that situation.
Right.
Yet you could universally understand it. That was the genius of the show.
Right. So, yeah, I don't know if that'll be something that will end up, but I would hope that it still finds its place as influential and hilarious and important.
Yeah, that can't be denied, regardless of if it gets canceled or not.
When you compare it to other shows that were on at the time, the other leading show was Home Improvement. Very different style and feeling.
Yes, Seinfeld wasn't allowed on in my house, along with The Simpsons.
Because he's Jewish?
Well, because he was something. I think it was because he was a New Yorker. No, my family had very different styles of humor. Home Improvement, however, was watched weekly,
yes,
religiously.
I remember watching Home Improvement. My parents thought that's good, you can watch that. And it was I believe my aunt who first introduced us to Seinfeld. And we talked last week about UHF.
Yep.
And then from Transylvania 65000, we knew, my sister and I knew who Michael Richards was. It was like, if he's in it, we're watching it easily. And I knew of Jerry Seinfeld because we watched a lot of stand-up comedy. So obviously I knew who that was.
Yeah, I had no idea.
And I think we recognized Elaine from Day by Day, old 80s sitcom.
Wow. You know the deep cuts.
Watched a lot of TV growing up. I was a latchkey kid.
Gotcha.
So, TV was
It's made you into the man you are today.
Right. You wouldn't be hearing this. So, thank or blame TV and my parents, but this is what you get. Yeah, so I recognized some of the cast, and then right away, I think the first episode I saw was Newman trying to get out of the speeding ticket.
Mm-hmm.
And Crazy Joe Davola in the bicycle helmet. Mm-hmm. Was the first one I saw, and I was hooked from that. And then it was no more Home Improvement. Now we're watching Seinfeld, and we watched it until it went off the air.
There was a shift in your household.
Yes.
Wow.
It was a paradigm shift of humor, and I was okay with that.
I'm sure.
Nothing against Home Improvement. It was what it was at the time, but very different. My parents definitely felt that they didn't even know. I don't think they knew about the show. And then when they saw it, they're like, oh, this is much more our speed.
I wouldn't call it sophisticated, but I wouldn't not call it that either.
It's just different. It's a different type of humor.
New style of comedy.
Right. But yeah, there's so many moments.
Brought to us by an old Jewish guy. I guess he wasn't that old at the time.
No.
He certainly blossomed into one. Both of them.
Oh, yes.
Jerry Seinfeld and Larry David.
Oh, yeah. They fell into those roles perfectly, and that's good. We need that still. Mel Brooks isn't long for this world.
No. Any day now.
So that'll be a sad day, but we do need that humor. And it's watched recently a documentary about Jewish humor, because it is a thing. There are a lot of Jewish comedy writers and comedians.
Oh, it's a thing.
And, it comes from that. It comes from upbringing. I can only speak as a Italian American Catholic. It's similar. We're like cousins in a way to...
You could just say you are. I don't think anybody would have a hard time believing it.
That's true. Yeah, I have that connection to it. But it's definitely a thing, and it does come from an upbringing. There's areas of guilt that are built into it, of not thinking you're better than anyone else, of neurosis. And it's definitely a thing, and it's given us some of the best comedy that, even, I mean, going back to the Marx Brothers, Three Stooges.
Yep.
There's something there about, and I love that so much, that for people who have been oppressed across all nations for centuries can still find humor.
Maybe that's why.
Right. And I think that is that's our defense mechanism. That's a defense mechanism in human beings. And they found it and they perfected it. And I love that. And Seinfeld and Larry David definitely tapped into that for their comedy.
Yes. Evolutionary psychologists take note.
Another thing about Seinfeld, there is a superhero that is referenced in every episode of Seinfeld. Superman is either referenced directly or some kind of visual. Jerry's apartment, he has a refrigerator magnet of Superman. He's got a statue. There's entire conversations between George and Jerry or other characters about Superman's sense of humor.
Well, I think Superman probably has a very good sense of humor.
I never heard him say anything really funny.
But it's common sense. He's got super strength, super speed. I'm sure he's got super humor.
I think that, but either you're born with a sense of humor or you're not. It's not going to change. Even if you go from the red sun of Krypton all the way to the yellow sun of the Earth.
Why? Why would that one area of his mind not be affected by the yellow sun of the Earth?
I don't know, but he ain't funny.
There's an episode of The Bizarro Jerry, which is a direct reference to Superman. And it just comes from that. Seinfeld is a huge Superman fan. He grew up at that time with Superman comics and just fell in love with that character. And he brings that into his stand-up comedy and into the show all the time.
Yeah, it's kind of cool being a old school DC guy myself. My first favorite superhero, comic super book heroes were Superman and Green Lantern and Aquaman. Got into Batman a little later.
Yeah. I think, I was definitely because of the 78 Superman movie, before all of the MCU and DC Extended Universe, way before all of that. It was Superman the movie with Christopher Reeve, who will always be my Superman.
He'll always be my Superman, too.
Had been portrayed several times, just like Batman, but I think that Christopher Reeve just encapsulated not only Superman, but Clark Kent as well. He changed his posture, the way he spoke, and it felt, especially as a kid, it felt so real. And I know Seinfeld, his frame of reference was more the George Reeves old television series Superman, but they kind of blend into each other of what happened.
Yeah, they changed. One big change was one was in color, so the red really pops. But at the same time, didn't it seem like George Reeves was like close to 60 when he was playing Superman?
Yeah, and he was like 1950s fit. Of just, you could have like a gut and still, like, as long as you had broad shoulders, you were in shape.
As long as you still punched guys who deserved it.
Right. And he, drank a beer and ate a hard-boiled egg every day. Mm-hmm. Just want to go back to that time so I can be considered fit. It was, Superman, the movie that got me into comics and superheroes. It was, the first two movies are great. Just an insane cast, and recently watched them with my kids. They loved them. I wasn't expecting them to, because when you revisit it,
that's cool.
Especially now with so many superhero movies out, you would think they would think it was cheesy or old. They loved it. They sat and watched both of them, and they thought they were great.
Awesome. Well, gives me hope.
It does. I think it speaks a lot to
just a good movie.
Yeah, they wanted to make a good, entertaining movie, and I loved. Again, growing up, it was what I knew from television or movies is what got me into actually looking at comic books. So, Superman was a big part of that for me.
Yeah, and it would take a while, I think, but with the success of that franchise, at least initially, some of the later movies weren't good and didn't do so well in the box office. But kind of set the stage for what we're seeing now of the comic book movie golden age.
Yeah. I mean, again, 1978. This was, that was, again, talk about another gamble. Will enough people want to see this? And thanks to really good, for the time, special effects that ended up, bringing it over. And the cast, Christopher Reeve, and he was fantastic. Margot Kidder, Gene Hackman, Ed Beatty, but Hackman as Lex Luthor.
Hackman
was so funny.
Some people can read War and Peace and come away thinking it's a simple adventure story. Others can read the ingredients on a chewing gum wrapper and unlock the secrets of the universe.
Such a great portrayal of Lex Luthor because he put a sarcastic twist on it in addition to being a megalomaniac.
Right. He's an accessible villain. Your best villains are somebody that you can identify with. And I think that villain was the first time you saw a villain not being... in the portrayals up until then, they were clearly the villain based on just their look or their kind of one-dimensional... Sinister.
I'm going to roll the
villain.
Right.
Yeah. He's the first guy that's kind of like...
charming.
Yeah, he has a charm to him.
Right. And I know he was in first two, he's in part 4, but we don't talk about
that.
Part 4 or part 3 for that matter. They're weird.
Yeah, part 3 is a Richard Pryor comedy.
Right, which just happens to have Superman in it.
With Superman in it.
And 4 is a whole other mess of the studio wanting money and luring Christopher Reeve back as long as it had a message about nuclear weapons in it. Mm-hmm. And then you end up with that. The nuclear quest for peace. And, whatever. It happened.
Yeah, it happens. And it'll happen again.
It'll continue to happen. Yeah.
But yeah, the first two, which weren't they supposed to be one long movie? And then they kind of pulled a Peter Jackson.
So, Richard Donner had originally made the longer movie that had the beginning with General Zod and the other Kryptonians, the bad Kryptonians, and they ended up coming back at the end of the first movie, and that whole story that ended up being part 2, but they ended up kind of splitting it up, and then when they did part 2, Richard Donner wanted to continue that. He ended up being let go or creative differences, which is why there's a difference in the theatrical version of Superman 2 and the Richard Donner cut, which are very different movies.
Yes.
I recently, again, rewatched the Richard Donner cut. I like it so much. Not that I didn't... Superman 2 might have been one of those rare sequel is as good as the original. A lot of that due to General Zod. Mm-hmm. And Terrence Stamp plays such a good villain.
There's a classic villain where you see him and you know he's the villain.
Right. He's got that steely look and he was just relentless. But yeah, there's a very big difference between those two movies. They ended up reusing the flying around the earth to, throwing the whole world into chaos to save one person you love. But
well, it worked before.
Right.
It's going to work again.
Why not try it again? And I like that he's a little bit petty because he goes back to that trucker diner and beats that one guy up.
Yeah, just to show that he's still got it.
Right. I always liked that because Superman's always been portrayed as more of a Boy Scout.
Yeah.
But I like that he was like, you know what, fuck that guy.
Yeah, I'm going to take time out and go pay him a visit.
Obviously, again, influential on so much of the movies we have today with superheroes. We wouldn't have the 89 Batman without the success of Superman. And for good or for bad, comic book movies were made, some great, some terrible. But that was the first one that really was a big hit.
Yeah.
That said, this medium can be turned into a movie. And part of that, we talked about the first two movies, something I think a lot of people forget, but the first two films, the screenplays were written by Mario Puzo. Mm-hmm.
That's a familiar name.
Also wrote the Godfather novels and screenplays for the movies.
That was it's not a very well-known movie.
I've heard of it. Again,
I heard it's good.
Being Italian American, I've never seen The Godfather. It's never been on every family holiday get together.
That would be funny if you had never seen it.
Wouldn't that be strange if there was just like one huge movie that like classic that I've never like I just don't want to see it. I don't like movies about Godfathers.
I was thinking about that the other night. There's got to be. Well, for you, maybe not.
For me, the biggest one I would say is Titanic.
Okay. No.
And that's pretty much because I know...
You know what's going on.
I know what's going on, right. There's not a lot of surprises. There's no twists that I can really... Like, really? I didn't see that coming. An iceberg.
It didn't sink.
But I would say that's the biggest. You know, there's a lot I haven't seen, but that's...
Yeah.
As far as well-known, popular films, that's it.
So being Italian and experiencing The Godfather, does that have more of a special meaning to you?
I think with at least my family coming from my mother's side, partially coming from Sicily, there is a connection there because my grandfather was born in America, but his father was born in Sicily. And there was that, especially in part 2, where you see young Vito growing up, you know, there was still that. Like, I heard stories from being passed down of what life was like in Sicily and what life was like coming to the United States and becoming a citizen here, and some of the difficulty it was being Italian at that time. I think there'll always be, if you are Italian American, I think there'll always be like we know what's going on in those movies. Like a little like sense of pride. Like you don't fuck with those people.
And I don't.
And you shouldn't.
For the record.
You know, those were the Godfather films and Goodfellas were discussed and on in the background at a lot of family get-togethers. And, cable would run the Godfather movies, AMC. And I know they did. They put it chronologically. So they took the parts of part 2 with young Vito first, and that section, all of that up until part 1, and then all of part 1 into part 2, the rest of part 2 with Michael, which was awesome. I loved seeing it that way, but I remember all those movies always being on, and, I had, again, forgotten that Mario Puzo, in addition to writing those fantastic novels and screenplays, had also done Superman.
Which also helped connect that bridge that brought Marlon Brando to Superman, of which you've likely never seen.
Yeah, I love that he got top billing for a third of the amount of screen time. And as 2 is where you get to see, in the Richard Donner cut, you get to see the full Marlon Brando.
Right.
Because in the theatrical cut, all his stuff was cut out, and they had Superman's mother in. So to see Jor-El back again, that was a huge thing at the time. He was the most well-known actor, especially of the first 2 Godfather movies.
Right, and that's why he was able to command such compensation, such salary to do Superman, that his parts ultimately had to be cut.
Right.
Because they couldn't afford to put him on screen. Based on his contract. So
I can't even imagine that.
It's an interesting case of a writer demanding too much that ultimately led to them being nixed from the movie.
That's just so amazing to me that was even a thing. That how do you... And people but they wanted it. They knew that, well, Brando's in it, people were going to come see it, give him whatever he wants.
Oh, and after you watch The Godfather, you'd likely agree.
Right. But man, there's not... First 2 Godfathers. 3, I know, has its detractors. And a lot of people say it's not as good as the first 2, but that's like, what is? You're taking 2 perfect films and comparing another one to it. Yeah, of course it's not as good as... Oh, perfection? It's not.
I mean, it wasn't 3 perfect movies.
Right.
So...
3 has its...
Not that cool.
Has some merit to it. And the other Mario Puzo works, Omerta and things like that are great, but those first two Godfather movies were just such a big part of our lexicon now. Yeah. And there's so many lines and parts of that movie that have gotten parodied and referenced and talked about and still discussed, after over 40 years?
50.
That's what makes right. That's what makes an excellent film. And you had such a good cast of not only Brando but Pacino. You had Robert De Niro in part 2.
Yeah.
James Caan. I can't remember his name. Oh man, I'm just gonna take my nerd cred down a little bit. But
you lost 3 points.
Right, Fredo.
Oh, Cassavetes?
Yeah, that actor was only in 5 movies, and I think they were all nominated for Best Picture.
Yeah, that the directions of Coppola kind of ushered in or helped with some other American directors usher in a new American cinema, which for my money is one of the best runs.
Oh yeah, I mean there was Coppola and Brian De
Palma,
and George Lucas,
Altman, Spielberg.
They were all part of that crew, and
Malick. I mean, all these guys were coming up all at that time. Must have been such an exciting time.
The 70s. I don't think it was this episode, but the past couple weeks ago, an episode of The Lost Symbol. 2 of the characters argue about which decade had the best movies, the 70s or the 80s.
Well, that's an argument that would take to the end of time.
Right.
So it's best we not even get into it.
Right. Which I thought was funny because the 70s was the start of so much of things we still know today that became so huge that were an influence on what's happening right now. And the 80s, our decade that we grew up in, there were so many fun popcorn flicks that were such a big part of, coming of age and growing up that just depends on what side of the coin you can. We've talked about that before. What makes a great film? Is The Godfather a great film?
Yes.
Yes. Is The Goonies a great film?
Yes.
Yeah. Are
you talking a Godfather Goonie mashup?
Well, I didn't want to say anything, but let's just say the Fratellis have
connections
done a little bit to piss off the Corleone family, and only the Goonies can do something with treasure. I don't know. I haven't worked it all out yet.
It's almost there.
But yeah, I again, just absolutely a all around. If you've never seen The Godfather, just stop this right now and go watch the fucking Godfather movies.
You don't even think to call me Godfather. Instead, you come into my house on the day my daughter's to be married and you ask me to do murder. Money.
I ask you for justice.
That is not justice. Your daughter is still alive.
Let him suffer then. As she suffers. How much shall I pay you?
A lot of people, understandably, there's a large contingent of people that claim they don't like long movies. Anything 3 hours or longer.
Right.
They just don't care to sit through that. So I could see how it becomes daunting for some people. I like long movies, but I get that some people don't. So it's almost like somebody telling you to read Moby Dick. Like, we all agree Moby Dick's a great book, but at this point, it's a big book. And if you haven't got around to it, you're probably not going to.
But you can always stop it or pause it. You can take a break an hour and a half in, just to kind of use the restroom, do something else, come back to it.
Refresh.
You owe it. Anyone owes it to themselves to watch it. All 3, but in particular the first 2 Godfather movies, which, as we're learning, only a couple little links between them. Meatloaf, there. And Meatloaf was never in The Godfather.
No, it was one of his dreams, but he never got to live it.
That's why I love these talks. That's why I like doing the show. Just a couple little things that connect everything together and exploring our connections. I think next week we want to discuss Clue, the film and or board game, and Naked Lunch.
Sounds fun.
Two very different things,
right?
But there's just a couple links between them.
Do you think the Godfather would like Meatloaf?
I don't know about maybe Michael.
Maybe Michael.
Which are we talking about? Vito? I don't think Vito would have much time for that.
I don't think he'd care for it.
Michael, depending on his mood,
right,
might get into it, but that might be like a younger generation thing.
Yeah. Well, down the road, we'll have to ask him.
We'll find out. As always, if you like the show, don't like the show, or blasé about the show, reach out to us. We're at ThePCCCast at gmail.com. That's ThePCCCast at gmail.com. ThePCCCast on Twitter. And then you can find us on Instagram under the Pop Culture Connection. And we're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google, pretty much anywhere you can find podcasts. Rate, review, let us know. Just shoot us a note. Tell us how we're doing. Ask a question. Give us a challenge that we can do to connect to items. We'd love to do a challenge episode. But until next time, stay connected.